G'day, welcome back to the third episode of Bookish and Based, the podcast from NatCon Australia, where Jordan Knight and myself chat about the goings on in the NatCon world, both here and abroad. It's still, Jordan, the Tucker Carlson show in Australia at the moment as he's touring the country. He had a famous or viral video that went down where he attended the National Press Club in Canberra and dealt with some of our journalists. What else can you what have you made of his tour so far?
Well, yeah, I mean, he really just sort of in that instance proves that he is just a cut above the rest, right? Like he really is just like a different specimen. And somebody posted on Twitter as well, sort of saying like, look, the reason that happened was simply because Tucker. Australian journalists aren't used to a level of sort of intelligence as Tucker, right? And so they don't know how to handle that sort of stuff. And I found the questions from the AAP journalist, Kat Wong, who was the one sort of asking about Tucker's stance on like the great replacement theory or something like that, was just so ham-fisted and just really exposed the bias, I suppose, but it's not even really bias. It's like they just inhabit this completely different worldview where they feel like they can ask ridiculous questions like this and not have anything bad happen back. But anyway, what were your thoughts on the incident?
Well, I mean, it was inane, and yeah, like you, it just shows how he's operating at a completely different level. He has very endearing lines. I like the way when he engaged with her, he's like, it's not a great way to start off to be friends and this type of stuff. It's not just an angry smackdown. He sort of half invites her in and then pulls the rug, and clearly there's just a complete mismatch between the information and thoughtfulness that he has done over particular issues and the way that she, and to be frank, it could have been anyone of 90% of the Australian press corps, because they all sort of operate along the same type of lines, using the same type of gotcha type of questions, and it just wasn't. Did you? So you had friends that attended Tucker elsewhere in Australia?
I got a few. Had a few people sort of just tell me about what he was talking about a lot, and the main headline thing that he was talking about was immigration, which is fantastic for me, in my opinion. And it's obviously something that there's a small component of Australians sort of politically interested who talk and are really interested in immigration, but it's a much bigger topic over in Europe and in America. And it's really excellent that somebody like Tucker is sort of coming out and talking about it, and not just talking about it, because a lot of criticism that I get, I think pretty rightfully so as well, is that I'm just talking about the economics of immigration too much, whereas Tucker, he's been in this space long enough and he's smart enough that he can actually really coherently talk about the social impacts of immigration as well. And the fact that he really bravely just sort of came out and said, look, I don't think he sort of alluded, I don't think he explicitly said, there's a great replacement conspiracy thing going on. But he did sort of say, from what I understand, from what I'm told, that people are, by definition, sort of being replaced. Birth rates are below replacement level, and at the same time, people are coming in. Now, that isn't me sort of endorsing that position, but it's hard to sort of disagree with that. And he sort of says, look, I mean, my position is like, okay, let's at least discuss it, right? Like, is it happening or is it not? I mean, just ignoring it is going to be the first thing to sort of, that will like shock people.
I find like that sometimes people either react positively or negatively to these labels. I mean, is it true that the West has sub-replacement birth rates? Yes, it is true. Is it true that with mass immigration there will be a demographic change in Western Europe, Australia, United States? Yes, it is true. Is that to the benefit of native-born Australians, Americans, Europeans, etc.? Well, okay, you can have a debate about that, and there's certainly some metrics which say it's not. And the gotcha she was trying to say is like, she tried to allege without any citation, which she called her up on, that he had said white Americans are being replaced, but he didn't. He's used Native Americans, and it almost exposed their ignorance that there are, native-born foundational black Americans that have been there since 400 plus years, who have just as much of an interest in maintaining the demographic composition of the United States and the economic, also economically threatened by mass immigration as well. So, he's just very well versed in the arguments and was able to sort of push back pretty humorously and hard against her. And that's the way. I mean, with this particular issue, I think he does show the way in how to constructively engage. If you are, get rid of whatever, chanting, or then people will naturally react against it. But if you're making much more constructive points and you're doing it in a kind of, reasonable type of way, then, people can disagree, but how can they deplatform you, really? I mean, they do try, but there's no basis for it. So this is the argument to be had, and it's probably should have been had 20 years ago, or even earlier. But at least him is he is able to sort of debate it and debate it at on his global platform in Australia. He has brought here.
Yeah, I do think that immigration, speaking of it in those terms, like the social and demographic impact, and also the economic impact. But I think just more broadly, like just talking about immigration, talking about it is enough to sort of show how bad the left is on it. And, even just by talking about it, they try and shut it down when it's a pretty sort of meager and meek conversation. So I think, it's one of those topics that you don't need to force, or you don't need to really have an outwardly right-wing position on, just by saying, look, this particular number of people are coming in every year. Is that good or bad for us? It shows it shows their weakness almost in the argument. And the same happened with Kat Wong and her question to Tucker. Like, just by talking about it, you show how bad their side is on it. But similar with the Media Watch segment, when they did a segment on me, it really just didn't really refute any of the sort of positions or arguments or anything that I put forward, because really all I put forward was mostly sort of just like ABS statistics and stuff like that. And so, they got into a big huff about it, and they got really angry, and they said, this is inflammatory, stuff like that. I'm like, dude, if this is inflammatory, it's just, statistics. Like, if it's inflammatory, that's your problem.
And also, it's immigration as an issue does cut across party lines. I mean, there are so-called right-wingers who are in favor of open borders and global, because cheap labor benefits particular, corporate interests. Are they right-wing? Probably, but there's left people of the traditional left parties who don't want immigration. At least their members don't, because it depresses their labor and costs. So it's not one actually that fits neatly within the kind of traditional, in Australia, bipartisan divide. So it shouldn't really, it shouldn't actually be something that lefties knee-jerk, have to be against, or that righties knee-jerkly for. It's like, come on, this actually will completely change the whole, composition of the place, and change the seats, and traditional Labor seats will go to different ways from what they've been going. And so it's something that all parties should be kind of interested in and be able to discuss like adults. Come on, guys. It's you have to go shrieking from the room as soon as someone says the word immigration.
That's right. So, and then the fact that they're not having that conversation, that sort of if they keep the lid on it, right, by simply sort of screaming, the pressure is going to build and build. So they're kind of putting themselves into a corner here. It's not
good to not address it at all, and not to be able to have like it all aired, because then the West elements and get to discuss it. Hey, speaking, it's somewhat less high profile than Tucker, but Toby Young from the Free Speech Union is also doing a tour of Australia now. He doesn't have quite the reach of Tucker, but he is reasonably well known, I think, for in circles. I think he was runs a column in the Spectator. Certainly, very well might have even edited at some stage, or still does edit it. Was known, certainly got a bit more profile during COVID when he ran the London Calling podcast with James Delingpole, and they discussed their different takes on that issue. And he actually, and very well connected in Tory politics in the UK. So he's out here doing a tour. Brisbane was his first port of call, and he's hitting all Australian capital cities, I believe. And he set up this thing, the Free Speech Union, 4 years ago, in response. I think he said it was basically in response to a need to help people who had suffered deplatforming attacks, like he did. And that's good and worthwhile aim, I think. A little bit like the ACLU in the United States, to provide assistance to people who are being attacked or losing their jobs because of things they've said. He kind of, Free Speech Union, he was at pains to point out, only defends people who haven't broken the law, and then it advocates for the repeal of certain laws, but it'll only take on cases where people haven't broken laws. And I don't know, I think that isn't as good a type of, so you basically you don't appeal bad, you don't take on cases where people are being prosecuted by bad laws, which, I don't know, certainly leaves a gap there for it means that people will be prosecuted if bad laws exist. And the UK is increasingly getting terrible for free speech. If you misgender people, if you any type of religious statements that others may take offense from. Anyway, so it's a big issue, and as we were discussing before, immigration is one issue where the public discourse is incredibly narrow because people are worried about getting sued for discussing, I guess, sensitive issues.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel to draw as well. I mean, the fact that Tucker's come out here at the same time, and Toby is, to me, it sort of represents almost this two sort of forms of the right. There's kind of like the Spectator, more classical liberal right, which up until very recently, I think, and still in some ways maybe, the dominant right, at least in terms of maybe institutional power, sheer numbers. But then there's this sort of insurgent sort of right, which is a bit more populist, gets a lot of working class sort of support. The reviews that I heard back from Tucker's events is that they're, predominantly working class people who are sort of working middle class people sort of showing up. It's an interesting thing. And what's more interesting to me as well, I'm guessing, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing Tucker probably drew the bigger crowds. He filled out the ICC. And So what do you make of that? Why do you think that, the Tucker more populist side of the right?
Well, in fairness, if you're a major talk show host in the United States, you're going to have a much bigger audience than the best columnists. They get the star columnists from the Fleet Street papers, or the I think we discussed the last time, the Douglas Murrays will come out here. They won't fill the stadium that get the bums on seats that Tucker did. He is just, I think he's even at a different level to those very erudite British types as well. But his message is different. The substance is different. I mean, he has a different take on stuff. Those British names, like Konstantin Kister and other people, the ARC crowd, they recognize the problem, but they sort of don't like the symptoms, and they think the symptoms should be addressed. But I think sometimes they misdiagnose the actual cause, or they don't want to address from first principles what the issue is. Like, they're still at heart classical liberals. They're not conservatives or in the deeper sense. And they so Toby, I asked him in Brisbane, and he's very civil and he's an earnest guy. I said to him, like, so what, you're fighting all these battles, and it's obviously worthwhile to have someone in your corner if you're caught up in a free speech dispute, but why did we get to a situation in the UK where free speech is so threatened? It wasn't always the case. We used to have, famously Get Up in Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner and say whatever you kind of wanted, with the exception of like direct incitement to violence and that defamation, those types of things. And then also, Toby, what happens in 20 years? Like, are you genuinely hoping with these sort of legal cases to be able to? And I just feel like in some ways the guy, and I don't want to be critical because it's all very nice, good work, but it gets a little bit bogged down in the minutia. Like, yeah, you have a little of a legal win here and a legal win there, and it's all very kind of, we can't push the bounds too much, but if we change this law on internet kind of thing, then that will benefit this, that, and the other. And I feel like it's like, well, hang on, dude, like you're kind of conceding your birthright, the British birthright of speech, the free speech that they used to have back in the day. And I do think it is a little bit related to the immigration issue.
Oh, really?
Because
Wow.
I think because people lost their careers in journalism and stuff for broaching topics, and they're nervous, and also the laws, because of the changing demographic composition of the UK, they've been required almost in order to maintain social harmony. They've been compelled to introduce laws to stop the incitement to well, it's not traditional incitement to violence. It's causing offence, right? Once you sort of allow, incitement violence has always been, again, keeping the peace has always been provided restriction on freedom of speech. But when you have you use offence as the test as to whether speech should be restricted, well, then suddenly all bets are off. People can get offended if you misgender them, be offended if you kind of, say the wrong, express an opinion they disagree with, or express an opinion in a forthright way, which traditionally was always possible in the UK. But because of, politicians wanting to appease different ethnic constituencies, I think that's the main driver of it. And I can't see how, if it continues, that there's gonna be some, like, how do you get back to the free speech, political exchange ideas that Britain used to be famous for? How does that occur? It doesn't occur through little tinkering and little court cases, I don't think. How do you get back to, in the United States, famously, has the First Amendment, and they've got these much celebrated cases where the Supreme Court says that protects the right of Nazis to walk in through a suburb and protest, even though obviously their views are abhorrent and all the rest of it. But because it's we protect freedom of expression, we allow that, and good ideas should prevail and push away bad ideas. But that idea is, it's a bit it seems like a bit of a antiquated idea now. I don't think many people in the political class truly believe that anymore, because they don't think it's politically popular, right?
No, that's true. It feels like sort of those days are over. And I think, like, to be successful on the right, and to sort of know what time it is and recognize where you are in the in the current history of things, is to sort of recognize that it's good work that he's doing, that he's fighting for free speech, but you'll never win a battle, you'll never win an argument by just constantly fighting a rear guard sort of argument, right? And I think just like desperately holding on to something while getting attacked from all sides and getting pushed from all sides isn't a way to actually hold on to something. You have to be radically assertive in your sort of beliefs. And I think you actually do. Like, just saying, no, we're for free speech all the time, while you're getting your head kicked in from all sides politically, isn't enough. You do have to sort of impose it onto others. You have to be assertive of free speech onto the country. You can't just be the side that stands for free speech. You have to, really fight.
I said to him, look, would you not be in favor of repealing laws which restrict people from saying racially and bigoted things? Obviously don't disagree with those, but surely as a free speech advocate, you should be in favor of pulling that back. He's very nervous about that. Like, it's like, well, you know what it calls, use horrible names to call people, I'll think less of you, but, but, I nevertheless think you should be able to say it in a free. And we had like the whole famous Andrew Bolt case and all the rest of it, where it got a lot of, but we had the big court case, a lot of newsprint ink spilt on it, but the law still hasn't changed. There was no public, there was no constituency, at least at the federal level, to change that law.
I think that it goes back to sort of that two strains of almost conservatism. I think, which is, there's there's almost the Toby and the Tucker sort of form of conservatism, right? And I think, there's that, what is it, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. I think, it's a good idea. It's nice to get people together to network, but I think even in the name, like an ARC, I think they did that on purpose, because they're sort of saying, look, we're going to ride this out, and civilization is in collapse, but we're going to hang together and it'll be good. I'm like, no, dude, I don't want that. I don't need an ARC. I need a battleship, right? Like, we want to be assertive, and we have the right ideas, and we have to have that confidence. And we should actually hold standards to society and say, if you have bad ideas, look, let them out, but we're not going to sort of indulge them by any means, right? Because that's what the left is doing to us. They're not indulging sort of our ideas on immigration, our ideas on free speech, our ideas on trade. No, they try and stamp it out every way. But for some reason, the writers are always saying, oh, well, you've got your sort of right to sort of, kick people's heads in and dox them. And like, no, dude, like, start, the best, I think it's almost a cop out to say, and I don't think it's like the way to do things, but at the very least, we should start doing to the left what they've been doing to us, right? Which is sort of, they've been sort of pushing their thing onto us and trying to keep our debate down. Okay, we'll push back, right? At least. But
and I think we tend to attack the symptoms rather than the causes of a lot of problems. And everyone, we attack particular manifestations of woke stupidity and whatever, rather than working out ultimately what the causes of them are. I mean, not to get too distracted, but it is interesting now you mention it, about ARC. It does suggest like there'll be a portion of people that'll be saved in the boat, but the rest of you guys can kind of hang. Whereas a Tucker audience, it's much more the deplorable type of who I personally, I'm happy to mix with the highfalutin, whatever, highbrowy types, but well-connected political types. But I actually kind of enjoy the Tucker audience in many ways, because they're just people who, and I think it's, in terms of mass appeal and frankly winning elections, you win it with the Tucker audience rather than the ARC audience. Speaking of elections and the like, I mean, the presidential elections obviously been the first debate was on. What did you what did you make of it? Like,
look, I guess my first impressions were that there's a lot less sort of tension and energy in the air than 2016 or 2020. Back then it really did feel like a sort of civilizational struggle, and people were just like absolutely shocked by the even appearance of Trump on the scene. But now it kind of feels like everybody's like a little bit tired, and the left is a bit maybe demoralized, and they're like, oh well, here we go again, sort of thing. And they've got this guy Biden up there, and even they're like, oh man, like what is going on? Like the last two elections with Trump in them, like 2016 and 2020, the mainstream media and like all the sort of commentariat was sort of saying, well, Trump's not fit for office. He's an old guy. He's dithering. He doesn't make sense. And somehow the Democrats have managed to put up an opposition that is far worse visibly than Trump on all of those counts. So they really just shot themselves in the foot, I think. But I don't know, Trump very obviously won that one. Biden embarrassed himself. He embarrassed the Democrats. People are sort of pretending that there's a sort of a DNC strategy at play here, and they're going to swing him out, get Gavin Newsom in, and then he'll. If I don't necessarily believe it, I actually think people are stupid enough to actually still back Biden in. But yeah, that's my take. What were your impressions?
Well, I'm kind of. I almost find these presidential debates, in the lead up to them, there's all this media village with where they go hark back to the Kennedy, Nixon debate, and I actually think it's almost like a boomer fetish, these debates. It's like, because inevitably the moon landing, these tropes that will come up, and this Cold War, and they hark, and then there's talk of just the inevitable things that, and it's not that as though these days that it's the only time that two presidential candidates get to exchange views, right? I guess back in the day, the beginnings of television, that was the only thing. But now there's, it's a whole new media landscape out there, right? As I don't have to tell you. And there's a million different ways of them engaging. So this is just like, it's like an antiquarian set piece that people, a ritual that people have to go through. And, the take from, out there, a million different takes, everyone's got views, but was, sleeping in its embarrassment. Not only, Joe Biden lost it, but it was an embarrassment, these two things. And I actually think, well, Trump was sharp enough for an old dude, an old dude. He was get on stage for an hour and a half and try and perform and think of answers. And the golf, what's your golf handicap, Jordan? No, it's just that was just peak boomer type of exchange. That one, but Trump is still raising issues. Immigration was mentioned, and I think whenever he mentioned that, it was just such a winning issue. Trade was mentioned, and foreign entanglements, Ukraine, everything else. He was making points which still no real mainstream politician in Australia is talking about in those terms. So what do you want? You want people discussing big issues. It's not, this whole pox on both these houses line, which everyone tends to use, is sort of a bit tiresome, really.
Yeah, that's right. And it gets to a point where it's so easy and lazy to be like, oh, they're both dumb, and it's like, no, pick a side, because you're gonna have to eventually. Just pick a side and back him in. Like, everyone is gonna fall in line on the right and back Trump. I mean, obviously, there might be a few sort of fools who will sort of counter signal Trump, but no, if you want your side to win, you'll go with him. And yeah, look, he wasn't amazing all the time. He had like a few slip ups, but mostly he was great. Like, he had great lines about like when Joe Biden said that he was going to destroy Medicare or something, or we beat Medicare. And it was just like, it was ridiculous. It was just like end of the empire sort of stuff, just watching this happening. But with Trump, I think what's interesting, well, if you compare how he sort of debates and talks compared to his other sort of 2016, 2020, it's interesting. People made mention of this as well, that he's a bit more sort of, he's almost a bit more sort of statesmanly now. He's not this boisterous yelling over the top of the other person. He's not like the loud, brash kind of guy. He actually kind of looks, to use a Zoom term, he kind of looks locked in, and he kind of comes off pretty angry as well. Like, he actually looks like he is sort of intent on getting retribution. Like, for him, with all of these court cases and everything sort of knocking on his door, like, the only way out for him is through. Like, the only way out is for him to actually win the presidency, and I think he really wants that. He had an interesting position on abortion. It sounds like he's sort of gotten a bit more sophisticated on that issue, and he even kind of like let the mask slip a little bit, and he's like, look, we want to win elections too, right? So he's given a bit more of a liberal position on abortion, which I think is probably pretty smart, actually, because if he makes the issue abortion, which is what the Democrats want it to be, and he takes a strong line against abortion, then he could be a losing battle. But he genuinely said he wants to win the election, and so yeah, it looks
I thought it was a very sophisticated answer that clearly knew it was coming, as it always does, and that he was schooled on it. It's probably an honest answer. Yeah, his style is funny. And I always find a little bit kind of crazy in Australia talking about US elections in a way, because in the same way that when Tucker came out here and he said, look, I don't know much about Australia yet, when you talk to people in Australia, they always have views on like who's going to win Pennsylvania. And yet you ask them, oh, and what are the top 3 issues in, I don't know, Adelaide? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I guess housing and immigration stuff. But people don't know their own country as well as they think. So what do they really know what's going on in,
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Petersburg, Florida, right? I mean, you can find out more, but it is just interesting. And do many people care as much as they once did about that particular issue? Yes, there are. What percentages, which demographic, which swing states, all this stuff we've learned to sort of talk about here in Australia over the last couple of years. But it was interesting. He's just his style is interesting. Trump. I mean, he can't divorce the style from the substance, and he still has that thing where you don't quite, he looks mad in some ways, but you don't quite know whether at the same time it's also has a bit of a comic element to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not sort of sweating and, he just has that. I think they released an attack ad after the debate where they had just Biden mumbling and Trump was just sitting there on the split screen with his view. But is he really mad? I mean, he sort of half seems to be enjoying it.
He does. He seems Yeah, go on.
There you go, man.
I was just going to say, I don't know. He actually, I don't think he is actually mad. I think he's probably, he's a really smart guy, very high caliber person. I think what happens sometimes is that he's kind of maxing out being a high caliber person. Sometimes he's very much hitting the upper limit of what he can sort of achieve, because he is still he's like 76 or something, right? But
it's impressive that you've felt out doing it. I mean, those old videos from Reagan and stuff, he's still his genial self, but he wasn't actually 76. He was when that happened.
That's true.
The other big news in Australia was sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say one more thing on Trump as well. He mentioned tariffs as well, which I thought was interesting, that he is pursuing a sort of protectionist tariff sort of policy, which is good. And he actually very clearly made the case for it in very simple and easy terms. He was sort of saying, yeah, we are going to put tariffs on China, and the person posing the question said, well, isn't that going to harm the economy? He said, well, no, actually, it's going to help workers, and that they're going to pay their fair share. And I thought his position on it was entirely reasonable and not at all sort of like this rabid protectionist, nativist dog whistler. It was like, oh, that seems incredibly fine and sophisticated.
He's probably, when you think about it, amongst all the different national populist sort of politicians globally, still the guy that is making the strongest case for tariffs and trade changes. I mean, the Europeans are, they talk about reindustrialization, but they're not quite as forthright as he is and specific as he is. And he doesn't have, he does tap in to a lot of people from like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and the rest of it who have made the similar type of case, but people have conveniently forgotten that they are also on the same page with Trump when it comes to trade arrangements. So yeah, it's interesting. Just because time's marching on, I mean, the other big thing, occasionally we get the eyes of the world turn on Australia for a media story. If it was, we banned what the e-commissioner took on Elon Musk, and then we got Australia became a global story, and then Tucker down here got a bit of a global story. But the other one, legitimately, is Julian Assange, who was released and arrived in Canberra. And as we were saying just before I started recording, I think there's a genuinely broad church of views within the NatCon world about Julian Assange and how one should think of the guy. But what do you think? I haven't asked you before.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I haven't really sort of cared. Like, he sort of got jailed or not jailed, but he started getting pursued sort of before I was interested in politics. I guess, like, broadly in terms of like hacking and what he did, I don't know, I always sort of refer to like the friend enemy distinction. Like, if he's hacking what I would consider like a sclerotic American global sort of arms manufacturing regime, if he's sort of hacking that and it's good journalism in that regard, I would be supportive of that. And I kind of think that it sounds like that's sort of what he did, is that he was sort of saying, actually, this war isn't necessarily justified, and what's going on isn't good. But look, if somebody's sort of hacking a friendly government simply for the, simply to be subversive and just to, in that sort of leftist sense of just destroying everything that's above them. No, I wouldn't be for that. But, again, it comes down to the friend-enemy distinction. I think possibly I lean closer to being supportive of him and what WikiLeaks did than I would be against. But again, it's contextual. I'm unashamedly sort of on the side of the friend-enemy distinction in this side, and I think he might be a friend. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, so Julian Assange, amongst the other places, actually spent a fair bit of his high school in Townsville, which is where I originally grew up. So, he's a native.
Is that right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Although different era, didn't know him. In fact, he was on Magnetic Island, which is an island off the coast of Townsville.
Is that right? But Queenslander. He was a Queenslander.
Yeah, another one. Hey, we're making waves. I think he spent a fair bit of time in Melbourne too, but to be fair. But anyway, so I think of the guy like you. I actually was never quite as emotionally invested in the story or interested in him as clearly other people were. And maybe I guess I should have been paying more of attention to him and the whole story. I think that, like you, look, I think Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a US congressman, they were both very supportive of Julian Assange. But I'm more wary. I mean, I think you have to make a distinction between the fact that some of the stuff he unearthed or released recklessly clearly harmed the operations in Iraq and other things. And NatCon guys are generally anti the crazy wars that the US and others have been engaged in for the last, since the end of the Cold War, right? So to the extent, but I actually don't know whether his release of documents and stuff and footage and what have really was the main cause of the American public souring on those interventions. I think they were just an additional thing on top, but it was really like the length of time and the lack of success and stuff. And the criticism that was made of it was, we're losing blood, treasure, and prestige in these foreign conflicts. It wasn't so. And I also think generally speaking, NatCons are in favor of nations, and nations do have particular interests, and there are always going to be things that need to be kept confidential, even though libertarian types of friends of mine are, have a very different attitude. But I do think there's something positive. I do think that the national security state was classifying far too much information, and the tendency, like at least in Western countries, should be to release, not to overclassify things, basically. And so that they were classifying too much, and he shouldn't be releasing things recklessly which harm it. But I think that what the upshot of it all is that these organizations now know that they're all potentially liable to be hacked at some stage, and so they probably now realize that we might as well release. Well, you'd hope that they will release more that is in the public interest and not be so cautious about protecting every single thing. We are still waiting on to change gears slightly, a whole lot of information on COVID and the decisions that were made in Victoria and everywhere else. I mean, the state does overreach and classify stuff that it shouldn't do. Now, if Julian Assange were to get the release of documents from Dan Andrews' Victoria, I'd be celebrating, or others would. So so that's my kind of general take on it all. I mean, it's just there's clearly the capacity to do real damage to people, to do real damage to friends, as well as to enemies. And I do take the criticism that he doesn't seem to be releasing stuff from the Chinese or the Iranians or other people as much, right? So I don't know. There's a movie I thought about Julian Assange, and no doubt clever journalists have mentioned in the past, but have you seen that movie Sneakers? It was Robert Redford and Ben Kingsley is the bad guy, but it's literally about these sort of guys who hack government departments, and they do it for different reasons. There's a lot of interesting discussion, but in the end, that comes to the conclusion that you can't do Ben Kingsley's the bad guy, and you can't do it for just to create chaos and anarchy in the world, because that's ultimately benefits no one. Anyway, that's the kind of moral of the story. It's a good movie. Yeah, it's got Sidney Poitier.
A note that was sort of nearing the end. Is there any sort of anything going on or anything noteworthy happened in Australia that that stood out to you? It looks like the Libs are still sort of pursuing, going on about the stupid nuclear debate and the memes about it, and nothing really is sort of changing there.
Oh well, there's different party conventions coming ahead. We won't say too much about those, but they. Oh, look, who knows? I think it's still nuclear, and probably Assange will dominate as well, because all these politicians, sort of left-leaning politicians, can't help themselves but attach themselves to a celebrity. So no doubt there'll be a bit of newspaper columns on that type of stuff going forward. But yeah, I think, like I said last time, I think they do get a bit bored with an issue too. So they'll print and start to chase other issues, which when they're finished talking about nuclear stuff. But it'll also depend on whether an election is called. There's still rumors about whether a federal election will be called, and potentially called September, and it'll be all nuclear, because that'll be one of the main issues at the moment. But yeah, no, nothing is anywhere near as exciting as Tucker. Free speech globally and Julian Assange. So
it's all very growing. Over in France, I'm getting content of my algorithm is now half in French now, just because we've been watching in France, and just like the ideas that are coming out are pretty incredible. Like honestly, it looks like people like I don't know how to pronounce Zemmour or something like that. He's to the right of Le Pen, I believe. Even he now is sort of just like getting involved in this like funny like online techno deportation song that's going on. Like he's just like sharing videos of him dancing to it.
He's a very interesting guy. We probably can chat about him another time. He's a journalist and a very, very thoughtful guy. Has interesting things to say about all sorts of things like sex differences and far more than just anti-immigration.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It was also most disappointed that his party wasn't the one that really caught on, rather than Le Pen's party, because he's a much more interesting character. But yeah, look, I think Australia will be at the influence of events in Europe, and the next two big events are going to be the UK and the French elections, right? And that will reverberate here dramatically, especially the UK elections, because we are still a bit of a sympathetic relationship with the British parties and what have. So that will be interesting. It'll reverberate here, and hopefully give us something to talk about going forward. NatCon here, there, everywhere.
Yeah. God, let's hope so. I think one more thing as well, just on what's going on over there. I think it's interesting the sheer amount of influence of that TikTok is having. It's getting a lot of sort of airtime, this discussion, and I do think as well, it's like whenever there is this sort of new form of social media, or even just like an app or something like that, it does, just by the nature of the social media itself, it does sort of skew the politics in a little sense. And so TikTok is obviously, the idea of it is just to keep you sort of as stimulated for as long as possible while you're on it. And so I do think that it helps shift away from this sort of boring politics of the convention is good, which I think at the moment left wingism and liberalism is sort of the new conservatism, because it's there now, it's the dominant thing, and the leftists are trying to conserve it and hold on to it. Whereas this new countercultural thing of like the AFD and the Le Pen, those are sort of like the new sort of insurgent sort of things. And I think social media algorithms like TikTok and Twitter are really sort of beneficial, because that sort of form of politics will thrive on highly sort of high stimulation sort of modes like TikTok and whatnot. So it's just it's been incredible to see the content that's been coming out of France and England. And I don't know if you saw the video of it. Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah. There's a million videos, but there's it is interesting. People are always talking about getting the youth engaged in politics, right? And TikTok is far more engaging for the youth than political breakfast shows, Insiders or Washington, UK equivalents, right? Because I think the right or other people, well, both mainstream political parties in Australia and likely and elsewhere, were wary of TikTok, wary of social media generally, but particularly TikTok, talking about banning it and all the rest of it. But I think in the last 3 months or so, there's sort of been an appreciation by Trump, who's now on TikTok, right, and got like whatever million views, followers in the space of an hour, that it actually does, like all social media, has its risks and its benefits, and it is able to. My friend describes TikTok as like red pills for normies, whereas TikTok is a bit more sort of like clever journalist repartee, I suppose. Whereas TikTok is much more for the masses, and it's Chinese controlled, and there's argument about that at least. But I don't know. I think sometimes the right the conservatives, or at least the new kind of politics, might certainly benefits from it at the moment, and it'll be no doubt replaced by something else. But you got to remember, like TikTok, Trump came to fore in 2016 basically on the basis of his tweets in many ways.
That's true. Yeah,
read tweets than read any silly opinion piece in the New York Times. And now what we are 8 years later, and it's whoever wins whoever has been able to sort of conquer the new medium that tends to get their message out and get it in an effective way that tends to have political success. So yeah, the European stuff is wild. I mean, European politics used to be so boring for so long, and now it's some of the most interesting stuff on the planet, I reckon.
Yeah, 100%.
So we'll certainly watch that in weeks and months ahead. Especially you're over there for a bit, right? So you'll be.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be giving on the ground reviews from America and from the chaos if it all falls apart.
Tear gas in the background, all that sort of thing.
That's right.
Crowds. I'm expecting really great footage.
If I'm never seen again, you'll know what happened.
Yeah, nice while it lasted. All right, Matt. Well, I'll leave it to it, and we'll check in again next week when we can connect.
Sounds great. Cheers, then. Cheers, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.